since I was at IIT Bombay. And it's interesting, I've never attended any one of these. Given my 20 plus days of travel, I've never found a way to be at the same place at the right time whenever Pan IIT has had its event. So Arjun, I must thank you for dragging me to this and making sure that I'm available. And I'll spend just 5 to 10 minutes talking a little bit about 3 themes that we see as we work with global corporations. So a little different perspective than the one that Hari gave. We work with about 600 global corporations across the world. 50% of them are headquartered in the US. So it's also a reflection of what we are seeing as we work with these clients, as we work with them in markets like the US. And 3 themes I want to talk about: the way they're thinking about themselves and the world, which is actually radically different from the way they've thought of themselves in the last 20 years. 2, innovation, and the way they think about innovation, the way emerging markets such as India are thinking about innovation. And 3rd, I think a topic that is important for us, but I think important in the broader context of these countries and where they are headed, the whole backlash, quote unquote, backlash to globalization. So when we work with corporations across pretty much every industry segment, one of the big themes that we are seeing, and it really started with the 2007-2008 downturn, is a complete relook at how do I run my company, change the way we run the company, start with a clean sheet of paper. Now that's very tough to do when you are a large corporation with billions of dollars of revenue, multiple sunk investments, legacy technology, as well as hundreds of thousands of people. And if you want to retool the corporation and change the way corporations run, it takes a long time. I think the period from 2008 to 2011, we actually see as a period where many companies have taken the opportunity to actually make that happen. So part of the reflection of the 9+% of unemployment rate, which doesn't seem to be changing and is very stubborn at that level, is that retooling that's happened. And I know that we are in an environment where we all think that the world is going to continue to be either slow growth or low growth or maybe even a recession in some parts of the world. It doesn't actually matter to whether it's a reasonable growth or low growth from our perspective on what it does to unemployment. Our view is that unemployment will continue to be very stubborn at where it is in the US, even if the US goes through a reasonable period of, let's take 2% growth rate. And that's because I think most corporations have got to a point of saying, one, the world is uncertain, and that's part of life. It's going to be like this forever. It's volatile. And therefore, I'm not going to build capacity in order to deal with growth when I see growth. I'm going to find a way to variabilize everything over time, because who knows if that growth is going to continue, because it's volatile. So we're finding a lot of corporations say, here's the way we used to run, we're going to change the way we run, here's the only thing we will do, and everything else will variabilize. The second part of the change that's clearly happening is finally every corporation, and I mean every corporation, even the laggards, are saying the only way for me to get even 1% growth in my portfolio is to attack the emerging markets. And we all know of corporations that have been very slow at looking at emerging markets. We find every corporation in our portfolio saying, I need to find a way to get to the emerging markets, whether it's Brazil, India, China, Eastern Europe, even Asia-Pac, small countries in Asia-Pacific. Because that's the only chance that companies have to find a way to get a little bit of growth to probably neutralize either low, no, or negative growth in the developed economies. And the interesting thing about that shift is companies have to find a way to fight for market share in the developed economies, and that takes money and investments and intelligence and insights, because it's the same share of wallet that you're grabbing. And in the emerging markets, you've got to invest. There's absolutely no chance to grab market share there if you don't invest. And I think big realizations that are coming up are, if I don't invest now and grab share now, I'm finished 10 years from now. To go back to what Hari said, when the purchasing power parity is going to be very different and the weight of the world is going to be different. And the last thing in that context that people are talking about is, therefore, should I actually have a different leadership team that runs this company? And I think the most progressive companies are thinking that way, not everyone. Where should the company be headquartered? Should there be a headquarters at all? Who is in my leadership team who's taking decisions? If the weight of the world is shifting, if the growth of the world is shifting, then do I have the right people on the leadership team taking decisions, and where do they sit? How many of them actually sit in the markets that are growing? So we are seeing shifts where leadership teams are shifting to the emerging markets, where emerging market leaders are actually growing faster than normal and becoming part of the broader leadership team in companies. All very interesting times, and all times of rapid change and therefore uncertainty. Let me touch a little bit on innovation, and this actually plays to some of the comments on emerging markets. We're finding more and more innovation actually coming from the emerging economies. We're finding that in our business, we're finding that in a lot of our client businesses. Whether you take the laptop or the tablet that has to serve the person in the village in India, or you take the ultrasound equipment that has to penetrate the village in India or China, and the only way you get there is start from scratch, figure out value engineering, figure out features, form and function that are needed for that market, and then reverse fit it back into a price point that you have decided is the only price point that will be sustainable. But here's the interesting thing that's happening. As those get launched and as that innovation picks up, the smarter corporations are actually beginning to take that back into the developed economies in different forms and fashion. We're finding, for example, in our world, when companies come into the emerging markets, they kind of take a clean sheet of paper and are actually saying, the only thing I will do is probably sales, marketing, I'll probably make my product, and maybe I won't, and I'll own my brand and I'll do my pricing. Everything else, I'll have someone else do. And we're finding companies therefore able to launch products in 6 months. And this is a full-blown launch in India, which most of you who've been there know is not easy. Because they're able to leverage off 20 partners to do 20 things, because they also have no legacy. And that's the interesting thing about emerging markets. Everything is about, I have no legacy, so I can start from scratch. So I'm going to go to the best technology. By the way, the movement to the cloud, we are seeing emerging market economies and companies in emerging markets dive into the cloud far faster than the developed economies. And that is also interesting, because then it means that their cost structure from day one is going to be different. So you fast forward this 10 years, it is very likely that in every industry you're going to have companies coming out of the emerging markets that are going to compete head on with a very different business model in every industry, where so far developed companies in developed economies have been the market leaders in the world. Whether you take the Hires of the world or you take the Bharti Airtel, I mean, these are companies that are sweeping into economies with a very different cost and business structure. And then the last one around, so the last final point on innovation. I know we've had many discussions in many of these kind of panels and other panels, etc., where I've been in dialogues where people say, innovation doesn't happen in emerging economies. Innovation doesn't happen in, for example, the IT and software sector in India. And I turn around to them and say, that's all bull, because it does. Because first of all, define innovation in a much broader sense. Just the tablet or the iPod is not innovation. Innovation is about the way you run your business. Innovation is about how do you deal with 30% growth every year in your company, and therefore you're adding 20,000 people a year, and you get to 200,000 people, and you still have one culture that cuts across the globe. And you find a way to do that in a very different way than the way, for example, over the last 50 years, developed economies and developed companies and developed economies have done. And the reason for that is because now technology is different and you're starting with a clean sheet of paper. So I think innovation is happening a lot in emerging markets. And companies that grab that as part of their ecosystem are going to be hugely successful. And then finally, backlash to globalization. We operate in 17 countries. We add approximately 2 countries every year in terms of our delivery centers. We have 50,000 odd people spread across these 17 countries that serve the globe. Some of those are actually in the US, serving US corporations. So we have about 3,000 people in the US serving US corporations in delivery centers, and that's growing at about 100% a year, far faster than the company itself. The biggest challenge that we find, and our clients find, is finding the people with the right skills to do the jobs that are needed today. So if there's one big problem that I think all of us and the governments in these developed economies have to deal with, is how do you reskill people to deal with the new world? We have a center very close to Chicago, and we need 100 odd technology people to serve some of our customers. it's damn tough to get those technology people in the Chicago, Illinois area. It's not easy. It takes forever. Unemployment rates are well north of 9%, and yet it takes forever. So there's a real problem in the skills gap between the people who are unemployed and available and half employed versus the skills that are needed to get them there. And I think the combination of, a lot of corporations in partnership with universities and the government have to really change things in order to bridge that skill gap. And until that skill gap is bridged, globalization will continue, number one. Number two, as long as the markets around the world continue to grow much faster than the developed economies, globalization will continue. As long as corporations want some growth, they will go to the emerging markets. And if they have to be successful, they will change the leadership teams of the companies and the way they run. So, to some extent, it's almost saying this globalization train left the station a long time ago. It's irreversible. There'll always be bumps on the road. The biggest challenge on globalization is not about corporations and the backlash of corporations. It's more backlash in countries and economies. And of course, the challenge there is that politicians need to get elected every 5 years or 4 years or whatever. Versus hopefully leadership teams and companies have a longer term view, and therefore they take decisions that have a longer term impact. But again, thank you for giving us the opportunity of dialoguing, and then really Arjun, maybe throw it open for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Tiger. As we promised, it's going to be an interactive session, so people please line up your questions and address them to Arjun, who will moderate the rest of the session.
Yeah, and so while you line up, let me start with the first question.